Dust swirled in the air as the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the alien desert in a deep red glow. The human walked slowly toward the tall gates, his boots dragging against the rough ground. His clothes were torn, his bag looked light, almost empty, but his eyes carried something heavy. At the checkpoint, guards stood tall, their armor shining under the fading light. Among them was an alien officer, sharp eyes, rigid posture, her voice crisp like metal when she spoke. He stopped in front of her, lifting his hand in a gesture of peace. "I need to cross," he said. His voice was calm, not demanding, only tired. The alien officer tilted her head, looking him up and down, judging him as if she could weigh his worth in a single glance. "Humans are not allowed here," she replied coldly. Her tone carried not only authority but also disdain, as though his very presence was an insult. The human shifted the strap of his bag and tried again. "I am not here to cause trouble. I only need passage. I can pay, I can work, I just need to get through." His words were simple, his eyes steady. He was not begging, but the weight of desperation was hidden behind the calm surface. The officer's gaze hardened. She tapped a screen on her wristband, pulling up his records. The display flickered, scanning his identity. She frowned. "No status, no approval, no clan. You are nothing here." Her words cut sharper than a blade. Around them, the other guards chuckled quietly, not out of cruelty, but from habit, as if they had heard this scene before and already knew the ending. The human's jaw tightened. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Only the wind carried dust across the checkpoint, and the hum of power barriers buzzed faintly. He could turn back. He could give up, but he did not. "I'm telling you the truth," he said firmly. "If you don't let me pass, something worse will come. Please, just listen." Her lips curled in a half-smile that held no warmth. "Worse? From you?" She stepped closer, her eyes gleaming under the neon lights of the gate. "Humans are weak, always asking, always begging. You think you can warn me? You think you can walk into my station and tell me what danger is?" Her voice rose, sharp enough to make the other guards fall silent. The human did not move. He stood still, his eyes fixed on hers, calm in the storm of her anger. That calmness unsettled her more than his words. For a heartbeat, she almost faltered, but her pride refused to bend. She raised her hand and pressed a button. The massive gates behind her rumbled, the sound echoing like thunder as they slid shut. The heavy clang sealed the border, and a red light flashed above, signaling denial. "You are denied," she declared, her voice final, like a judge's hammer. "Turn around and leave. You will not pass." He stared at the gates for a moment, then back at her. His expression was unreadable, neither anger nor sadness, just a quiet acceptance, as if he had already expected this answer. Slowly, he nodded. "I understand." He turned and walked away, his figure growing smaller with each step, swallowed by the desert twilight. The guards relaxed, their laughter low and careless. To them, it was nothing. A human denied, a rule followed, another day at the border. But the officer's eyes lingered on his back. Something about his silence pressed against her thoughts. It was not the way of beggars to walk away without curses or tears. It was not the way of liars to leave without a fight. There had been something in his voice, a weight that clung to her even after he disappeared into the distance. She shook her head, forcing the thought aside. Duty was duty. Rules were rules. Still, as she turned back to her console, the horizon darkened in a way that made her skin crawl. The wind carried a new sound now, low and distant at first, like thunder far away. She glanced up, her eyes narrowing. Dark shapes flickered in the sky, moving slowly but with purpose, and a cold feeling settled in her chest. The gate had closed, but with it, something far larger had just been set in motion. The officer stood stiff at her post, eyes on the monitors, but her mind wandered to the man who had just walked away. His calm voice still echoed inside her head, and she hated that it did. She had denied many before him, but this one felt different. She tried to push the thought aside, telling herself that humans were always dramatic, always pretending to be important. Yet something about his silence as he left unsettled her more than angry words ever could. The checkpoint was quiet, except for the steady hum of the energy barriers and the faint buzz of lights overhead. The other guards joked among themselves, their voices relaxed. The officer pretended not to hear them. Her eyes kept flicking toward the horizon, where the man had disappeared, even though she told herself it was pointless. He would vanish into the desert like all the others. Then, A low vibration reached her ears. At first, she thought it was just the shifting wind, but the ground trembled slightly under her boots. She straightened, scanning the sky. The light was fading, and the red horizon was bleeding into black. A shadow stretched across the checkpoint, then another. Her chest tightened. These were not clouds. She snapped a command, her voice sharp, pulling the guards to attention. They looked up, confused, until the shapes grew clearer. Dark ships, lean and predatory, drifted through the sky like vultures circling prey. The officer felt her stomach turn cold. She recognized the design. Pirates. "Raise the shields!" she shouted, her hands flying across her wrist console. The barrier flickered brighter, energy fields hardening around the checkpoint. But even with the shields up, she knew they were in danger. The station was small, built for border control, not for battle. The guards rushed to their positions, but their movements were shaky, uncertain. One of them muttered, "There shouldn't be pirates this deep in the sector." Another swallowed hard. The officer silenced them with a glare. "Doesn't matter where they should be. They are here. Prepare yourselves." Her voice carried command, but inside, unease gnawed at her. She sent out a distress signal, calling for reinforcements. The message pulsed through the network, but no reply came. Her console blinked with silence. Either the signal was blocked or no one was answering. She clenched her jaw, refusing to let fear show. Still, her mind betrayed her with a single thought: the human. His words had been almost a warning. "If you don't let me pass, something worse will come." She shook her head violently, as if that could scatter the memory. No, it was coincidence. Just coincidence. The pirate ships began to descend, their engines rumbling like beasts hungry for blood. The air grew heavier, hotter, as their weapons charged. The checkpoint's lights flickered under the strain of the shields. Civilians inside the station cried out in panic, pressing against walls, clutching children. The officer barked orders to evacuate them deeper inside, but she knew the station had nowhere truly safe. A loud boom cracked the air. The first blast struck the outer shield, sending ripples across the glowing barrier. Sparks rained down. The guards fired back, their shots flashing weakly against the thick armor of the pirate ships. It was like throwing stones at giants. The officer's pulse hammered. The pirates moved closer, circling like predators toying with prey. Another blast shook the ground, and the checkpoint groaned under the impact. The officer steadied herself, refusing to show fear in front of her men. But the truth was clawing at her insides. They would not hold for long. She gripped her weapon tightly, her knuckles white. For a moment, she thought of running. She thought of abandoning the station and saving herself. But the thought was crushed instantly by the image of her officer's insignia on her chest. She was sworn to protect this post, these people. Running was not an option. Still, as the shields weakened and the pirates prepared for another strike, her eyes flicked one last time to the horizon. The human had vanished there. A foolish part of her, one she despised, almost wished he would appear again. She clenched her teeth, forcing the thought down. Humans were weak. Humans were nothing. And yet, the silence of the desert beyond the gate felt heavier than the roar of enemy fire. The second wave struck. The shield collapsed with a scream of energy, bursting into sparks. The pirates roared forward, landing with claws of metal tearing into the ground. Their hatches opened, spilling out armored raiders with weapons blazing. The guards shouted in fear, scrambling to hold the line. The officer drew her blade, standing firm as chaos erupted around her. Her heart pounded, but she refused to step back. Inside, though, her mind whispered the truth she didn't want to hear. Maybe she had made a mistake. Maybe denying that human had been more than just duty. The sound of gunfire filled the air. The checkpoint burned under pirate fire. And in the middle of the smoke and screams, regret began to crawl deep into her chest like ice. Smoke filled the air, burning the officer's lungs as she shouted orders. The checkpoint was shaking with every blast. Civilians screamed, trying to hide, while her guards fought desperately, their weapons glowing, but too weak against the armored pirates. She swung her blade, cutting down one raider who came too close, but another quickly replaced him. They were too many. Her heart hammered as she tried to push the fear down. She had trained for years, commanded soldiers, and stood at the border to keep enemies away. Yet now, standing in the chaos, she felt small. The pirates moved with ruthless speed, and every strike pushed her people back. Her soldiers were falling, one by one. For the first time in years, doubt clawed at her. A memory flickered in her mind, uninvited. The human. His quiet eyes, his calm words, the way he warned her before she shut the gate. She had dismissed him as weak, as worthless, but now his voice echoed louder than the explosions around her. "If you don't let me pass, something worse will come." Her hands tightened on her blade. Was this what he meant? She shook her head, trying to chase the thought away, but it would not leave. The human had walked into the wasteland with nothing, no armor, no soldiers, no station to defend him. Yet he had carried himself as though he knew something she did not. She hated that she was thinking of him now, while her people bled, but the image of his back walking away burned in her memory stronger than the flames around her. A blast tore through the wall beside her, throwing her to the ground. She coughed, tasting blood, her ears ringing. Through the smoke, she saw civilians trapped behind fallen debris, children crying as pirates advanced toward them. Her chest tightened, panic clawing at her throat. She struggled to rise, but her leg throbbed with pain where shrapnel had cut deep. For the first time, she thought this might be the end. Her pride, the rules, the laws she lived by, they all felt like thin glass now, breaking in her hands. She had believed she was strong by denying the weak. She had believed following orders made her powerful. But now, as she watched the pirates close in, she realized she had been blind. And the thought of that human, the one she had cast aside, filled her with something she could not name: regret. The civilians screamed as the pirates raised their weapons. The officer forced herself to crawl forward, dragging her blade through the dirt, her body shaking but her spirit unwilling to quit. She raised the weapon with trembling hands, prepared to throw herself in the way, even if it meant nothing. The pirates laughed, mocking her broken form, their guns aimed without mercy. Then the sky lit up. A thunderous blast struck the ground near the pirates, throwing them back in a storm of fire and dust. The officer froze, her eyes wide. More explosions followed, tearing through the raiders' ranks, scattering them like leaves in a storm. The air shook with the sound of heavy firepower, but it was not pirate weapons. It came from the desert, the very direction the human had gone. Through the smoke, a figure emerged. At first, it was only a shadow against the fire, but as it drew closer, her heart stopped. It was him, the human. His clothes were still torn, his face smeared with dust, but in his hands he carried human technology she had never seen before. Compact, brutal weapons glowing with raw energy. His movements were fast, precise, filled with purpose. He fought like a man with nothing left to lose, every strike aimed to protect, not to destroy. The officer's chest tightened as she watched him charge into the raiders, his weapons spitting fire. He moved through them like a storm, dragging civilians out of danger, cutting down pirates with reckless bravery. For every wound he took, he kept moving forward, his body refusing to stop. The civilians who had screamed in fear now looked at him with wide eyes filled with hope. The officer pressed her hand to her chest, her breath uneven. This was the man she had denied, the man she had treated as worthless. And now he was the only one standing between them and death. For a moment, she could not move. She could only watch as the human fought like no soldier she had ever seen, every movement filled with grit and fire. Pride burned away inside her, replaced with a sharp ache of shame. She had called him weak. She had turned her back when he asked for help. And still, he came back. Her blade trembled in her grip. She forced herself to stand, pain burning through her leg. Her voice caught in her throat as she whispered, almost to herself. Why would he return? The pirates regrouped, roaring in anger, charging again. The checkpoint burned, the air filled with fire and screams. Yet at the center of it all stood the human, holding the line with a strength she could not deny. The officer felt her heart twist. For the first time in her life, she wanted to believe in someone she had once despised. And as she watched him fight, risking everything for strangers, the regret inside her grew heavy, pressing down harder than the smoke above. The smoke rolled thick over the ruined checkpoint, flames rising high as the pirates closed in again. The alien officer, blood on her face and blade trembling in her hand, thought she would see the end. But then, through the dust and fire, the human pushed forward like a storm. His steps were steady, his weapon burning with light, and his eyes carried no fear. He had nothing to shield him, no armor to protect his body, yet he moved as if death itself could not touch him. The pirates turned their weapons toward him, laughing at the sight of one lone man standing against them. They fired, their shots flashing bright, but the human rolled across the ground and returned fire with deadly precision. Every blast from his weapon hit true, tearing into the raiders and forcing them to scatter. He fought with the kind of focus that made even the officer's heart pound harder, not out of fear, but out of awe. He moved closer, shielding the civilians with his own body, dragging one injured child out from under a fallen beam while still firing at the enemy. His arms shook with exhaustion, but his will did not. The officer could only stare. She had called him weak, had turned her back when he asked for passage. Yet here he was, protecting her people as if they were his own. The raiders regrouped, trying to overwhelm him with sheer numbers. They charged, blades and guns raised, shouting as they rushed into the smoke. The human did not retreat. He dropped his rifle, its power drained, and drew a smaller weapon from his belt. His fist clenched it tightly as he charged into them head-on. Metal clashed, sparks flying as he fought like a beast cornered but unbroken. He ducked under swings, slammed his weapon into one raider's chest, and spun to block another's strike. His movements were raw, less polished than trained soldiers, but fueled by something deeper, survival and the will to protect. The officer's breath caught as she saw one raider break through, charging straight for her. Her body froze for a second, pain and fear holding her down. The pirate raised his weapon high, ready to end her. But before the strike could fall, the human was there. He slammed into the raider with all his strength, knocking him away. The blow landed on the human instead, blood spraying across the dirt. Still, he did not fall. He turned, eyes blazing, and cut the raider down before stumbling back, breathing hard. Their eyes met in that moment, across fire and chaos. The officer's throat tightened. She saw no hatred in him, no anger for the way she had treated him, only a fierce determination to keep fighting. Something in her chest cracked open, something she had held shut for too long. Shame, regret, but also something else, respect. The pirates roared, regrouping again, Mathula, heavier fire blasting through the walls of the checkpoint. The civilians cried out, the guards screamed in panic, and the ground shook with each impact. The officer steadied herself, forcing her injured leg to hold. She would not stay frozen any longer. With a sharp cry, she raised her blade and threw herself into the fight beside the human. Together they fought, back to back, her blade slashing through the raiders, while his weapon fired with deadly accuracy. She felt his presence at her side, solid and unyielding, like a wall she could trust to never break. Every time a raider slipped past her defense, he was there to stop them. Every time his weapon's fire was too slow, her blade struck first. For the first time, she felt they were not two enemies bound by pride and rules, but two warriors fighting as one. The battlefield was chaos, but in that small circle of fire and blood, something changed. The officer no longer saw him as a weak human begging for passage. She saw him as a fighter, someone who risked everything when he had no reason to. He had been cast aside, denied, insulted, yet he came back when they needed him most. That truth weighed heavy on her heart, more than any wound she carried. Her soldiers saw it too. Their broken line began to hold, courage sparking in their eyes as they watched the human stand tall against impossible odds. Some of them shouted his name, though they had only just learned it moments ago, voices rising with desperate hope. The civilians clung to each other, whispering prayers, watching the stranger who fought like he belonged among them more than anyone else. The pirates pressed harder, angered by the resistance. Their leader roared commands, bringing heavier weapons forward. Explosions ripped through the ground, tearing apart barricades, and the checkpoint shook like it would crumble into dust. The human wiped blood from his face, his chest heaving with every breath, but his eyes burned with the same fire. He looked at the officer for the first time since returning. His lips curved into a tired but fearless smile. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. The officer gripped her blade tighter, her jaw firm. She no longer saw a man she denied. She saw a warrior, and for the first time, she believed in him. The next wave came crashing down, and together they charged into it, their cries cutting through the roar of battle. In that moment, the officer knew her life had already changed. And though the fight was far from over, one truth burned clear inside her. This human was not weak. He was stronger than any rule, stronger than her pride, and stronger than the fear that had haunted her people for years. The smoke rose higher, the battle raged louder, and at its heart stood the human who refused to fall. The checkpoint shook with every blast, walls breaking apart as fire spread through the outpost. The air was thick with smoke and sparks, but inside that chaos, the human and the alien officer fought side by side. He covered her when the enemy tried to flank her, and she struck down those who slipped past his fire. Their movements slowly matched, like two blades moving in one rhythm, and the guards around them began to rally with new courage. The human fired until his weapon overheated, then switched to another, his hands steady though his arms shook with exhaustion. Sweat and blood mixed on his face, but his eyes never wavered. The officer caught herself stealing glances at him as they fought, each time surprised by his focus, his refusal to bend even when the odds were crushing. She had once called him weak, yet now she saw a strength in him she had never seen in her own kind. A pirate leapt at her with a blade raised high. She spun too late, knowing she couldn't block in time. But before the strike could fall, the human stepped in front of her, catching the blow on his shoulder. He grunted in pain, but slammed his fist into the raider, knocking him down. She gasped, her chest tightening. He had taken the hit for her without hesitation. "Why?" she breathed, but he didn't answer. He only reloaded his weapon and kept firing. Her hands trembled as she fought harder, guilt pressing deep into her chest. She remembered the moment she shut the gate in his face, the way he had looked at her without anger, only calm acceptance. And now, despite everything, he stood here risking his life to protect her. She couldn't understand it. No law, no duty, no oath demanded he do this. Yet he did. The pirates poured in heavier, their leader sending wave after wave, determined to break the defenders. The checkpoint groaned under the assault, walls crumbling, energy flickering. The civilians huddled in corners, eyes wide with terror. The officers saw fear in her soldiers too, but then their eyes would flick to the human, watching how he refused to fall, how he threw himself into the fight as if he had nothing to lose. And in their eyes, she saw something change. Hope. She realized then that he was more than just a fighter. His presence itself was a weapon. His courage was spreading through them like fire, and it was keeping them standing when they should have broken long ago. The officer ducked behind cover, gasping for breath, her side bleeding from a deep cut. The human crouched beside her, his weapon sparking as it cooled. For a moment, they looked at each other, both exhausted, both barely holding on. "You should have left," she whispered, her voice shaking. He gave a tired smile, one corner of his mouth lifting. "I don't leave people behind." The words hit her harder than any blade. She turned her face away, ashamed, because she had left him behind. She had abandoned him at the gate without a second thought, but he had returned without hesitation. The difference between them weighed heavy in her heart. A loud explosion shook the ground, and the pirates cheered as the last outer barricade collapsed. Their leader, taller and heavier than the rest, stepped forward, roaring orders. More raiders surged in, weapons blazing. The officer tightened her grip on her blade, but her arms felt weak. She was bleeding, tired, nearly broken. Her people looked to her for command, but her voice caught in her throat. Then the human stood tall, raising his weapon high, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Stand together. Don't give them an inch." His words were simple, but they carried a fire that pulled the soldiers back to their feet. They shouted and pushed forward, following him as if he were their commander, not her. The officer's throat tightened, but she did not feel anger. She felt relief. Relief that he was here. Relief that someone could give them strength when she could not. She forced herself to rise and fight again, not out of duty this time, but out of a desire to stand beside him. The battle dragged on, every moment heavier than the last. The human saved her again when a raider nearly struck from behind. She saved him when two pirates tried to pin him down. Their trust built without words, born from survival and fire. The officer felt it growing inside her with every heartbeat. Something new, something she had never expected to feel for a human. As the pirates pushed harder, the human leaned closer to her, his voice low but steady. "They're not stopping. We'll have to make them." She saw the plan in his eyes, dangerous and reckless, but filled with certainty. He was ready to risk everything, maybe even his life, to end this. Her chest ached as she realized what he meant to do. She wanted to stop him, to tell him not to throw himself into death. But the words would not come. She could only grip her blade tighter and whisper, almost to herself, "Don't die." He gave no promise, only a nod, and then he turned back to the fight, fire in his steps. The checkpoint shook again, the pirates howling as they charged. And through it all, the human pressed forward, his courage dragging her and everyone else with him. She had once denied him passage, treating him as less than nothing. Now, standing beside him, she knew he was the only reason they still had a chance. The battle was not yet won, but one truth had already carved itself deep inside her. This human was not weak. He was stronger than she had ever believed, and with him, she would fight until the very end. The sky glowed red with fire as the pirates brought their heaviest machines forward. Massive cannons rolled into place, their barrels humming with deadly energy. The checkpoint walls were already cracked and falling apart, and the officer knew they would not survive another direct hit. Her soldiers looked to her for orders, but she had no answer. The civilians clutched each other, waiting for death. Only the human stood tall, his weapon in hand, his face smeared with blood and dust, but his eyes calm. He looked at the broken barricades, the frightened people, the roaring pirates preparing their final strike. His jaw tightened as if he had made a choice. He turned to the officer, his voice low but steady. "I can stop them, but it will cost me." Her chest tightened. She shook her head instantly, almost without thinking. "No, you can't. You've done enough. You've already saved us more times than I can count." Her voice trembled despite her effort to sound strong. But he only gave her a small smile, the kind that carried no fear. "If I don't, none of this matters. They'll kill everyone here. Someone has to end it." She stepped closer, grabbing his arm, her blade still in her other hand. Her eyes burned with anger and desperation. "Why you? Why must it always be you? These are not even your people. Why risk your life for those who denied you?" His gaze softened, and for a moment, the fire and smoke seemed to fade around them. "Because life is life. It doesn't matter whose it is. If I can protect them, I will." Her throat closed. She wanted to argue, wanted to scream at him not to throw himself into death, but the words broke inside her. She realized he was not asking for her permission. He was only telling her the truth of who he was. The pirates' cannons charged, glowing brighter, ready to fire. The human pulled a small device from his belt, its surface cracked and sparking. She recognized it instantly, an explosive charge, powerful enough to take out the pirate machines, but deadly for whoever placed it. Her heart froze. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's suicide." He met her gaze, his expression calm but unyielding. "It's the only way." The officer's hands trembled as she released his arm, her pride and strength breaking apart inside her. She had once seen him as nothing, a weak traveler begging for passage. Now she saw him for what he truly was, a man stronger than all of them, because he carried courage when no one else could. He turned away, moving toward the smoke, his steps steady even though his body bled. The officer's chest ached as she watched him go. Every instinct screamed at her to stop him, but her legs would not move. All she could do was whisper, "Don't let this be the end." The pirates roared, their cannons releasing their first strike. The ground shook violently, fire raining down, screams echoing across the checkpoint. In the middle of the chaos, the human moved like a shadow, slipping past wreckage and bodies, closer to the enemy line. Bullets and energy bolts rained around him, but he pressed forward, the device clutched tight in his hand. The officer cut down raiders desperately, trying to clear a path, but her eyes never left him. Every second felt like an eternity as he ran deeper into the fire. She could hear her soldiers shouting, calling his name, their voices filled with fear and hope. Even the civilians pressed against the walls, watching with wide eyes, as if they understood that their fate rested in the hands of the man they once would have turned away. At last, he reached the edge of the enemy line. The pirate cannons loomed above him, monstrous and ready to strike again. He ducked behind wreckage, his body shaking with exhaustion, his blood dripping into the dirt. He pressed the device against the base of the largest cannon, his fingers working fast despite the tremor in his hands. From a distance, the officer could see the glow of the charge as it armed. Her chest tightened so hard it hurt. She wanted to scream his name, to beg him to come back, but her voice broke before it left her lips. He turned his head slightly, and even from far away, she knew he was looking back one last time. Then he activated the charge. A blinding flash tore through the battlefield, the explosion louder than thunder, ripping the pirate machines into burning pieces. The shockwave shook the ground, knocking soldiers and raiders alike off their feet. Fire rose into the sky, swallowing the machines that had promised their doom. The pirates screamed in panic, their formation breaking as flames consumed their weapons. But when the smoke cleared, the officer's heart stopped. The human lay crumpled near the wreckage, unmoving, his body torn by the blast. She pushed through the battlefield, her blade cutting without thought, her body driven only by desperation. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed in pain, but she would not stop. She reached him at last, falling to her knees beside him. Blood covered his chest, his breath shallow and uneven. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed her hand against his wound, her other hand gripping his shoulder tightly. "You fool," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You should have run. You should have saved yourself." His eyes opened faintly, weak but still burning with that same fire. His lips moved, his voice barely more than a breath. "I told you, I don't leave people behind." Her tears fell onto his face as she shook her head, her heart tearing apart. Around them, the battlefield was quieting, the pirates retreating in panic, the checkpoint still standing. But none of it mattered to her in that moment. All she could see was him, the human who had risked everything when she had given him nothing. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering again and again, "Don't die. Please don't die." Her pride was gone, her walls broken, and all that remained was raw regret and a desperate hope that the man she once denied would survive the price he had paid for them all. The battlefield was silent except for the crackle of fire and the distant screams of retreating pirates. Smoke drifted over broken walls and shattered weapons. The officer knelt on the ground, her hands stained with blood as she pressed against the human's wound. His body was still, his breaths shallow and weak. She could feel life slipping away from him, and her heart ached with a pain she had never known before. Around her, soldiers began to gather. They had seen him fall, seen the explosion that destroyed the pirate cannons. Their eyes were wide with awe and sorrow. Some whispered prayers, others simply stood in silence. The civilians clung to one another, staring at the man who had saved them all. No one moved to celebrate the victory, because the cost stood clear before them. The officer bent closer, her forehead almost touching his. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare leave now. You saved us. You can't leave like this." Her tears fell onto his face, but his eyes remained closed, his chest rising only in faint, broken breaths. Memories flooded her mind, sharper now than ever. The moment she had denied him passage, the sound of the gate slamming shut, the look in his eyes as he walked away without anger. She remembered thinking he was weak, a beggar, unworthy of trust. And now, that same man had given everything to protect the very people who had turned him away. Regret burned inside her, heavier than any wound. She had misjudged him, and the shame cut deeper than any blade. Her soldiers looked to her, waiting for words, but she had none. All she could do was hold him, praying silently to any force that might still listen. The human had fought for them without hesitation. He had given more than any of them deserved. She realized then that strength was not measured by laws or bloodlines, but by the will to protect others, even strangers. And in that measure, no one in the galaxy was stronger than him. Minutes passed like hours. The flames died down, leaving only smoke and ash. The pirates were gone, their leader slain, their machines destroyed. The checkpoint still stood, battered but unbroken, saved by a man who had no reason to return. The officer lifted her head, her voice trembling as she spoke to her people. "Remember him. Remember what he did here. Never forget the human who stood when no one else would." The soldiers bowed their heads. Even the civilians who once sneered at humans now wept openly, their voices soft with gratitude. They understood that their lives had been bought with his courage. The officer looked down again, brushing blood from his cheek with shaking fingers. She whispered so only he could hear. "I was wrong. You are not weak. You are stronger than anyone I've ever known. and I will never forget you." For a moment, she thought it was the end. His chest was so still, his skin so cold. But then, faintly, she felt the smallest movement under her hand. His breath, weak but present. Her eyes widened, her tears falling harder now. "He's alive!" she cried out, her voice breaking into the silence. The soldiers rushed closer, hope sparking in their eyes. Medics scrambled forward, carrying what little equipment they had. They worked quickly, sealing wounds, stopping the bleeding, their hands shaking with urgency. The officer refused to move from his side, holding his hand tightly, whispering words to keep him anchored. "Don't leave. Not now. You're needed. We need you." The medics stabilized him, though they warned she should not hope too much. His body had taken terrible damage, and survival was uncertain. But the officer held on to that one fragile thread of hope as if it were life itself. She would not let go. Hours later, when the fires had burned down and the survivors gathered in the ruins, the officer stood before them. Her voice was steady now, filled not with pride but with conviction. "We are alive because of him. He fought when we could not. He stood when even I faltered. Never again will we call humans weak. Never again will we deny their worth." Her people bowed their heads in respect, their eyes turning to the human lying unconscious on the stretcher, his chest rising and falling slowly. They saw not a beggar, not an outcast, but a warrior. That night, the officer stayed beside him, refusing to leave. She watched his face, the quiet rise and fall of his breath, her heart heavy with guilt and gratitude. She whispered promises to him, promises he might never hear, but that she meant with all her soul. "If you live, I will make it right. I will honor you. I will never forget the man I once denied." The stars shone faintly above the ruined checkpoint, the galaxy stretching endless and silent. But within that silence, one truth had been carved deep into every soul who survived that night. Humanity was not weak. One human had proven it, not with words, but with sacrifice. And though his body lay broken, his spirit had already changed them forever. The officer held his hand tightly through the night, knowing that whether he woke again or not, the galaxy would never see humans the same way again.